that Brady would be using from that particular period. Not the exact machine, but the same types of machines.
Is that you with the lady in this picture?
It might be, but I don't think so. I was off doing other things. I was pretty busy during that event. That locomotive was built in 1856. It's the William Mason. It, along with the one that you're going to see next coming up, were used by Walt Disney in the Great Locomotive Chase.
On the Georgia line?
Yes, that's the one that represented the General. Now notice the boxes and barrels. Notice the writing on there. You can
Where'd
see.
you get the boxes?
Well, we made most of that.
I was going to ask you, where did you get who makes your flags for you?
We have a lady in Baltimore who makes flags. And
Uh,
she uses French seams and makes them in 2 panels. Say like the white flags, the 4-foot flags are made in 2 panels with the insert. We've researched some of those, and we've got the dimensions and so on.
during the, I guess it was during this Civil War centennial, sometime in that period anyway, our office became responsible for an exhibit in the Pentagon, and we wanted to depict, among other things, wigwag flags, and the only place we could get any, the wigwag had long been, for a long time, you could find it in the signal manuals until really rather recently. I'm thinking now in terms of 20 years or so ago, I guess. I haven't seen it lately. Was still a valid way of signaling. It wasn't the official way, but they mentioned in there, and they even I think said something about you could wave your handkerchief. But anyway, there weren't any, and the wigwag flag was a standard signal item for a good many years, but they had long since disappeared from the Civil Corps supply depots. The only place we could find one was from Boy Scouts supplier. I don't know whether they still permit wigwag or not. When I was a Boy Scout in the 1930s, you could either learn to signal with wigwag or semaphore flags. And I picked semaphore, although I never really learned to signal with it.
A little bit more difficult.
I just wasn't any good, but anyway, I think most of all the boys I knew, they take the wigwag flag. I mean the semaphores. But anyway, you could still, in the 1960s, the Boy Scouts, you could still buy wigwag flags in the Boy Scouts. So that's where we got our wigwag flag. Oh, that's an old.
That photograph you're looking at now is...
that predates the Civil War back some years.
Well, what's interesting is that locomotive, that's a replica, that's an exact replica, an operating steam locomotive at that, of the 1837 Lafayette.
I was going to say that's an old time.
The Lafayette, when we did this event, we did it to represent 1863. The Lafayette was
Hope you didn't have
retired.
these in any special order.
No,
I've got
no, I
one
didn't.
mixed up.
The Lafayette was retired from service in 1863.
1863.
Yeah, that's when they retired it.
I'll be done.
So that locomotive
Where was that used?
This was used in the yard in 1863. It was used in the yards in Baltimore.
That's interesting.
Now, we built that siding there in less than 5 days. It was 400 some feet long. We were shooting for 780 feet. That's including laying the switch in to the main line there. I don't know if that photograph shows it or not, but we also had a mile of telegraph poles erected, and we had the little stobs that stick out on the side. You can see it, I think, in this one, perhaps. I'm not sure. You can see the telegraph wire and the stobs in one of the pictures as well.
That's interesting.
That picture there will probably be very interesting to you.
You're practicing wrapping a rail around telegraph
Yes,
pole?
people kept saying, well, they're Sherman's neckties, but in 1863 they would be called Union hairpins. Now, what we found out, we've rediscovered a number of things, just like we do when we go out and we signal. We rediscover a lot of the things that they did, and a lot of the little messages that they try to give us through Brown's book and Myers manual, and we don't pick up on. We eventually pick up when we make the same mistakes. With this, we realized that the fire that had been cooking for those 2 or 3 hours and heated that rail, the heat remained localized in that little section of rail. It didn't extend out to either side. So you could pick up, you could get 15 people on each side and get very, very close to that red hot section of rail without getting burned, because the heat stayed right there in that area. And so obviously they knew that, but no one else has, because we've not been bending rail ever
Rails
since.
in the
They
Civil
didn't
War
write about it?
probably weren't as strong as the rails today, are they?
Well, no,
Not-
and that's
they got a
another
lot
thing.
better steel now.
Yes, exactly. Now they had steel, but they didn't use the steel in the rails. They used wrought iron.
It was all wrought iron, was it?
Yeah, it was wrought iron.
Which would melt and soften a lot easier than steel.
Yes,
wouldn't it?
yes. And you probably wouldn't have to cook it as hard, but the rail that we were using was very old rail. Now, we didn't know the process that was used to make the rail that we were using. It was very old, it was heavy, but it was short little pieces of rail, like I said. So we know that. Here you can see the telegraph.
Oh, yeah.
You can see the little stobs. They call them woodpeckers. They stick out from the side of the pole and look.
Oh, in the insulators?
Yes, and then the insulator fits on top.
Yeah, I've got a few old insulators downstairs. I've also got a piece of rail from old Panama Railroad, 1850s.
Picture of me and John Ott, the executive director of the museum down there, and in the background we're standing next to number 25, which is the
What museum is he the director?
the B&O Railroad Museum.
Oh, in Baltimore.
Yes.
I've been wanting to get over to that museum.
Would you like a free pass? And it would be a pleasure, and I would even make sure that you got a Cook tour. He'd take you in the back shop and show you all of the things
Sure,
under
makes it
restoration
worthwhile.
and so on.
A cook store? What'd you say?
A Cook store is
Wow,
being,
huh?
Cook store.
yes, a Zouave. That's an 1850 Smith.
Looks like a fire truck.
It is. It's a gooseneck. It's a restored, hand-drawn pumper fire engine, and we used that day. We had a little holding tank, and we squirted water out of the. Matter of fact, the hose you can see is going to the filling tank, and there's the hose
How
here.
many gallons could that pump a minute?
Well, it depends on how many muscles you have, because on either side there's a big long rod, and everyone gets on the side and they pump.
Yeah.
But you see, we want to do it right, and we want to be as authentic and have the documentation to back us up in whatever we do. And that's the reenactor side. In the researcher side, most of the information, in fact, is around. It's just having it in one such a location. It's just better to go look for it there, and realize, well, if I've got to go out to the University of Wisconsin, I can do that. Because let's face it, you've had the opportunity that a lot of us have not, and of course we're the enthusiast. You were doing that a lot for work, but still there was more to it, and you can tell in what you read. There was more to it than just doing the job. It was interesting. You enjoyed it, and
Well, you have to get involved in. You have to develop some interest, I guess, in order to
Matter, honey?
stick with something like that long enough to really do what I did with my dissertation and these other things I've written. But you know, the fact of the matter is that I think Meyer was a terrible old stuffed shirt.
you think he was a workaholic?
Well, I guess I guess he probably was. I don't think he had much of a sense of humor. He was blessed with a feeling of great self-importance, I think. And he was class conscious, which is one of the things I don't like about him. When he was before the war, before he became chief signal officer, he got a medical degree, days when it wasn't all that hard to get one. He had about the equivalent about one semester of formal studies, plus a period of a year or so of working as I think they call it the prosector, under a very famous surgeon. I think he's the one who later attended McKinley after he was shot.
Mhm.
But he got a medical, and he was associated in medical school with some of the most famous surgeons and doctors of the day. It was a day in which medical training was not, not very good.
Mhm.
It was much in this country. It was much better in England or in Europe. It was in his period in which doctors would get their medical degrees without ever having witnessed a child being born, for example.
Mhm.
And it was in Meyer's day that one professor, I think it was one of Myers's professors, got prosecuted because he took his senior medical students into a hospital room where a child was being born. They actually witnessed it. That was considered even medical students
Not
didn't
proper?
do that. That wasn't
I
proper.
see.
But Meyer practiced medicine for a short time down in South Carolina, and one day he happened upon a slave who had somehow or other thrown his shoulder out of joint. Had an accident. It was an accident, I guess, horse and carriage or something. And Meyer wouldn't set the man's shoulder because he was thinking that he might get in trouble with the master for doing something without his permission. Then some other doctor comes along and sets the poor man's shoulder, and Meyer proceeds to criticize his technique. He said he used slings and pulleys and whatnot. Meyer implied he could have done it much more efficiently, but he didn't do it. And when he was a young medical officer out in the West before the Civil War, he resented having to treat Teamsters families and that sort of thing,
yes.
because he wasn't getting paid for that.
I see.
He was kind of a jerk.
That's unfortunate.